Hello, Elizabeth here, and today I'm going to show you how you can rhinestone over any pattern on a tumbler using transparent rhinestones. This is a great option if you have a really intricate tumbler pattern that you want to add some sparkle to, but you simply don't have the time, the patience, or the materials to sit and rhinestone the pattern color by color with different sizes of each stone. You can purchase tumblers that come pre-printed with a pattern, or you can sublimate your own custom pattern, so the options with this technique are really endless. I'm going to walk you through everything step by step.
I started with this stainless steel tumbler that came already printed with the tie-dye pattern, but of course you can do this technique with any tumbler pattern that you want. For this project, I used transparent rhinestones in the size SS20. If you want to add some iridescence to the tumbler, you can also get clear stones that have an AB finish. My favorite glue for rhinestone projects is called Gem Tack by the brand Beacon, and I transfer it into a precision tip bottle. I like to use a wax pencil that can be sharpened to pick up and place my rhinestones. As always, you can find links to all of the products I'm using in the description of this video. Typically, when I rhinestone a tumbler, I always begin by sanding the whole thing with sandpaper to rough it up and give it some texture for the rhinestones to adhere to. But because I'm working with a patterned tumbler this time, I didn't want to risk scratching the tie-dye, so I just skipped that step. I gave it a good clean with some rubbing alcohol to remove any dirt or oil that could be on the surface. I applied a thin line of gem tack across the top of the tumbler and used my wax pencil to pick up and place the clear rhinestones side by side all the way across the cup. The glue looks really white under the stones and it does hide the pattern for now, but once the glue dries it will be completely clear and you'll be able to see the pattern through the stones. Once you get to the end of your row, you may not have a big enough space for one more stone, and in that case, you just need to work backwards and do a little bit of nudging around to put a tiny amount of space between some of the previous stones and close in that gap. You're aiming to have as equal space between the stones as possible. As you can see, now that the first row has dried, the glue doesn't look white anymore and the pattern is coming through. For this tumbler, I just used one size of rhinestones for the whole thing, and I did the honeycomb method, which means as I applied each row, I placed the stones in the gaps between the stones of the previous row. The stones nestle into that little slot where the previous stones meet, and the end result looks a lot like a honeycomb. This method is really quick because you know exactly where your stones are going to be placed, everything fits together, and you don't need to waste any glue because you can place a dot of glue in the exact spots where each of your stones will be sitting. It also makes for a cleaner application with less mess and no glue spilling out everywhere. And this honeycomb pattern will continue for the entire rest of the tumbler. Each row of stones is placed in the gaps between the stones of the previous row and they line up directly under the stones from 2 rows previous. It's important to note that this technique works best on tumblers that are completely straight, and you will run into spacing issues if there's any sort of taper or curve on your tumbler. I have another video demonstrating how to do the honeycomb method on a tapered or curved tumbler. It just requires some extra care with your spacing and is a little different than a straight tumbler. I did run into an issue partway down this tumbler where all of a sudden my stones were not fitting perfectly anymore and some of them started to pop up. And then I realized that this tumbler is not actually straight. It does have a bit of a taper to it. So towards the bottom of the cup, I could no longer fit the same number of stones in a row as I could at the top of the cup. If I had noticed this from the beginning, I would have started at the bottom of the tumbler instead of the top, because the bottom is where the tumbler is most narrow. And then towards the top of the cup, there would have been slightly more space between my stones than there were at the bottom of the cup. But I would have been able to fit the same number of stones in every row. I'm not sure if my tumbler was faulty or if all of them from this brand are like that, so just be aware that if you order the tumbler linked in the description, it may have a bit of a taper and you should start at the bottom instead of the top. It was too late for me to restart from the bottom, so the way I dealt with this issue is I sanded down the sides of a couple of the stones in a row with some sandpaper so that they would fit. And then in the following row, I did one less rhinestone than the previous row and carefully placed the stones so that the new spacing wouldn't be noticeable. Later on down the tumbler, I had to do that one more time where I sanded 2 stones in one row and then removed a stone in the next row. I was happy with the final result, and I don't think it's noticeable that I had inconsistent spacing partway down, which I think is partly thanks to the fact that the pattern under the stones is so colorful and it just blends right in. But if I were to start this tumbler over, I would definitely start at the bottom and it would save me all of that extra work. When you get to the final few rows of your tumbler, the spacing can get kind of tricky because there may not be enough room to perfectly fit another row of stones at the bottom, and you may end up with a weird gap. So I like to do my last few rows all at the same time so I can put a little bit of extra space between a couple different rows to line up the final row with the edge, instead of having a big noticeable gap before or after the very last row. A little bit of space between multiple rows is always less noticeable than a lot of space in one row. So I just find it easiest to figure out the sweet spot of that spacing by doing the last few rows all at the same time. Always make sure your stones aren't overlapping the bottom edge in a way that will interfere with the tumbler standing up on a flat surface. And here is the final result. As you can see, once the glue is fully dry, it doesn't look white at all. It's perfectly transparent and the pattern looks nice and bright, shining through the stones. I love this technique because to the untrained eye, it kind of looks like I used many different colored stones to create the tie-dye look, which would have taken me 10 times longer, but it gives a really impactful result with much less time and effort. Always let your glue dry for a full 7 days before hand washing your tumblers, and if you've never washed a rhinestone tumbler before, I have another video tutorial demonstrating how to do that.
I hope you found this tutorial helpful, and if you enjoyed this video, I would love for you to subscribe to my channel and leave a comment letting me know what sort of projects you'd like to see in the future. See you later!